Hello and welcome to everyone to the fifth Climate Smart Agriculture webinar. My name is Valdete Berisha, and I'm part of the Agriculture Global Practice at the World Bank. As many of you know, today's webinar is part of the series of webinars on climate smart agriculture organized by the Global Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture, or GACSA. For those of you who are joining for the first time, the objective of the CSA webinar series is to highlight the results of 6 country case studies assessing the state of climate smart agriculture implementation. Through these webinars, the Global Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture provides an open forum to discuss the extent to which existing national strategies and programs in various countries promote CSA practices, as well as it examines some of the challenges that various countries are facing in the implementation process of the CSA practices. If many of you may have joined us in our last webinar, which was last week and featured the country case study of France. Today, we will learn about CSA implementation in Malawi, and our last webinar in this series is scheduled for tomorrow, and it will feature the country case study of Tanzania. You can register for that webinar if you'd like to attend via the link that I've posted on the chat box. So if you look at the right-hand side of the screen, you will see a link, WebEx link. So please click on that, and you'll be directed to the registration page. So today, I'm happy to welcome our speaker, Wilfred Kadewa, who is an environmental and resource management specialist with over 14 years professional experience in environmental management and development. Wilfred currently works at the Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources and is the Dean of Faculty of Natural Resources. Wilfred is a member of the Soil, Land, and Water Technical Working Group in Malawi, and has been the project coordinator for the Climate Smart Agriculture project for the research component at LUNAR. Joining the discussion during the question and answer session will be John Musa, Director of the Land Resources and Conservation Department in the Ministry of Agriculture, Irrigation and Water Development in Malawi, and Wycliffe Kumwenda, Farm Services Manager in the National Smallholder Farmer Association of Malawi. So our speaker today will share with us lessons from Malawi and will discuss the specific measures and practices currently in place relating to climate smart agriculture practices in Malawi. So before we go into the presentation, I wanted to say a few words about the format of the webinar. The webinar will be 1 hour long. We will start with Wilfred's presentation, which will be about 30 minutes, and then we will be able to take questions from the participants. But I would like to let everyone know that you don't have to wait until the end of the presentation to ask your questions. If you've attended our previous webinars, you'll be familiar with the format, and because we have a large number of attendees, we can't allow use of microphones among participants. So we kindly ask everyone to type in your question in the chat box. Select from the drop-down menu if it's already not by default all participants. That way we will ensure that we all receive the question and your question is appropriately addressed. So please use the chat box, and if you currently don't see it, if you look on the right-hand side of your screen, at the top there should be a tab that says chat. Once you click that, the chat box should be enabled for you. So at the end, we will also conduct a very brief survey just to get your feedback on what you thought about today's webinar, the topic, and the discussion. The webinar will also be recorded as it's a usual practice and will be posted on the GACSA website I have been in contact with our GEXA colleagues at FAO who are working to make all of the webinar recordings available. And I think during the next couple of weeks, we should have them up on the website for you to go back and listen to them or share them with your colleagues if you're interested to do so. In the meantime, the PowerPoint presentations will be made available, and all of the other ones from the previous webinars are already up on the GAGSA website. So this one will also be made available after the webinar as well. I will post the link to the GAGSA website shortly. So you can go to the website and download the previous presentations if you're interested. So with that, I would like to hand over the microphone to Wilfred so we can start the presentation. In the meantime, I look forward to receiving your questions. I will collect all of them and then ask them in the order that they've been sent in, and hopefully we'll be able to answer all of them. Thank you.
Well, thank you, and good afternoon. My name is Wilfred Kadewa, as already indicated, and I will be taking you through the case study of Malawi in climate smart agriculture. And the way that the presentation will proceed is that I'll give a general overview of status of agriculture and climate change in Malawi, then talk about the various interventions that looked at and accepted as being climate smart, and then talk about how they have fed into and how also the policy environment is addressing and taking on the lessons from what is happening on the ground, and finish on challenges and opportunities, particularly in the financing of climate smart agriculture. So to set the scene, Malawi is in the southern part of Africa, in sub-Saharan Africa, has a population of 15 million, which is quickly moving to 16 million people. In terms of land mass, total land is 9.4 million hectares, and out of this 9.4 million hectares, 7.7, which constitutes 82%, is available for agriculture. And this 82% further broken down between land that falls under estates, and that's 13% of the total, and land that falls under smallholder agriculture, which is a huge chunk, 69%. Now, if you look at land available per capita, the numbers have been going down, obviously, because of population increase. Going back to 1970, land available per capita land holding 0.4 hectares, and that has moved down to 0.2, plus or minus, still going down with the increase in population size. If we focus on the fact that the majority of farmers in Malawi are smallholder subsistence farmers, and relate that to their farm productivity, the picture that comes out is that productivity is very low, and the challenges are many. We expect the largest part, which is taken by smallholder farmers, to be very productive, but the cost of farm inputs is one major challenge, and another one being poor and degraded soils, also contributing to the problems in farm productivity. Labor bottlenecks, particularly during peak periods, production periods also just compounds the challenges. Appropriateness of technologies that are available, and then inadequate agricultural extension services. These are the main things that really affect productivity. But of late, increased production risks due to climate change have also made a significant mark in reducing or affecting productivity of the land that is available for agriculture. But then when you look at the parcels available for production, the majority goes for maize. Maize being the staple food in Malawi, as is shown in the graph on the bottom right. So when it comes to interventions and strategies, one also sees that maize will feature highly, and efforts are directed in particular towards maize because of the reason that it's number one, it's a staple food. So the interventions and the discussions that will follow will highlight the position of maize in the agricultural production system. Moving on to historically, one major issue that's contributing to the thinking or the drive towards being smart is, if you look at the annual precipitation, going back to the last 30 years, you see that Malawi has been experiencing climate change effects, particularly from the changing in onset of rainfall, erratic rainfall, and dry spells, as can be seen in the graph. In some cases, you have increased rainfall within short periods. So these changes have affected agricultural production and economic activities. Obviously, given the large contribution that agriculture makes to the country's economy, whatever happens in rainfall, and rainfall being rain-fed agriculture being also the main means of production, has a huge bearing on the economy of the country. So understanding that climate is changing is very important, because that then helps us to do something about what is happening before the damage on livelihoods and health becomes too much, too big to handle. But also, when you look at where Malawi ranks in terms of vulnerability to adverse effects of climate change, with a large proportion of farmers being on the subsistence farmers' end, you find that vulnerability to climate-related stressors then features very, very, very highly. Hence, the need to have a smarter approach, to have a climate-smart approach on board, so that we mitigate all these problems. Now, looking at what has been happening on the ground, what practices are being implemented on the ground, one has to go back to the understanding of climate-smart agriculture as an approach that is defined by its intended outcomes rather than the specific practices. But then this, when the phrase climate-smart agriculture was being coined, it took time to settle, with some confusion between what climate-smart agriculture really is and the practices that, though they were not being referred to as being climate-smart, for example, conservation agriculture and so on. There was a bit of confusion, but with time, farmers and players in agriculture started appreciating and things picked up. So you find that practices like manure making, rainwater harvesting, construction of dams for harvesting, storing water, and investment in irrigation. These, in the last 3-4 years or so, after the understanding of the meaning of climate smart agriculture had started settling, these then picked up. Practices like agroforestry practices, adoption of agroforestry, these with increased extension inputs, these started picking up over time. And so even stakeholders, organizations, and government's approach towards extension services was also changing. Now, with the problem of extension services having a few technical people on the ground, different approaches like lead farmer approach and group learning, as is showing in the picture on the top left, that people coming together and learning together, practicing together, so that afterwards they go back and do things in the right way. So group learning and lead farmer concepts, particularly due to extension service problems, has also taken root and has contributed greatly to the uptake of the concept of climate smart agriculture. However, there were still other practices, for instance, challenges. For instance, competing uses for maize stocks with livestock feeding. So you find that farmers have to come to a point of making a decision, but based on trade-offs. And again, through the climate smart agriculture project, I'm talking about the one under EPIC, which started in 2012, thereabouts to 2015. The understanding in what is beneficial was spreading, and this is shown in the numbers of farmers and hectarage that's being placed under smart practices. And again, going back to the input by stakeholders, I'll give an example of National Smallholder Agriculture Association in Malawi, NASFAM. They cover over 13 districts, which is half of the number of districts in Malawi, with over 43 farmer associations, a membership of over 100,000 farmers. You find that all the members appreciate and are aware of climate smart. But again, when it comes to adoption, it started slowly, but now you see 40% going on to 50% of the farmers that have been made aware adopting, and you also see the yields or the spin-offs in their productivity and gains at the end of their efforts. And specifically to look at in these areas, maize production, there's been an increase of up to 75% in yields for maize production for those farmers that have adopted climate smart agriculture approach. Now, just an overview of the technologies and the measured impacts as of 2015, looking again at the specific practices. Conservation agriculture, you find that the yields recorded average countrywide up to 11%. In certain places, there's even the potential of going to 26, close to 30%, and the evidence of reduced labor costs. Records show that up to 25% reduction in labor costs, and this is really making those that are not adopting or were hesitating. In fact, farmers where they have a piece of land, you find that they were starting with just a small portion of that piece of land put to climate smart practices, but after seeing and realizing the yields, even the hectareage that's put under climate smart approaches has been increasing. Agroforestry, for instance, yield increases 100%, and the impetus, the momentum is picking up because of the evidence of increased productivity with these kinds of practices. So it is very important, clearly important, that we harness, we spread the gains, and in particular, make sure also that policy picks up on the positives and enhances them. The enabling of the environment that would then facilitate that all stakeholders, government, non-state stakeholders, are empowered even more, because the gains are obvious from what is shown in these practices, including water retention structures and going towards area maturing and drought-tolerant crop varieties and feeding systems for livestock. So just to show a national picture of the changes over time in terms of hectareage that's being under climate smart approaches. Going back to 2008-2009 season, you find that yes, there was a peak which drops when you get to 2011-2012. Then the sharp increase from 2012-2013 to 2014 is a clear evidence of the impact that the climate smart agriculture project under EPIC made, because that sharp impact coming from a background of 2011 to 2012, when the economy of Malawi was not doing so well, and you have farmers not investing as much in agriculture, but the gains that were observed from climate smart agriculture approaches with such sharp increase going into 2013-2014 are clear evidence of the picking up and the appreciation of the climate smart agricultural approach. When you reflect again on the number of farmers that are practicing, you see the same trend that from 2012 going on to 2013-14 season, there's again a sharp increase. That's the same period when the Climate Smart Agriculture EPIC project was picking up. So looking at the number of practicing farmers 8 years ago to now, the numbers have doubled. Have now over 1 million, yes, out of the 6 million smallholder farmers, but this is a substantial number of farmers that are practicing. Although the increase is much bigger for number of farmers as compared to hectareage, this is where the issue of farmers testing the waters, if you like, by putting just a small portion of their land under climate smart agriculture. But of late, there has been an increase in hectareage because of the positives that the farmers have been experiencing. So that steep increase is key, and the issue now would be to maintain that momentum going forward, so that you end up having 2 million, 3 million farmers adopting climate smart approaches and obviously that would then feed back into the production system and the food security issue. So that's where now again the issue of the policy, enabling policy environment comes in, so that the gains that have been observed in the last 2-3 years, that momentum is maintained, and farmers stay on track. So the question obviously will be put on, what is the policy environment as of now, and where are we coming from? A lot of the talk of synergies between agriculture and climate change goes back to early 90s and late 90s, and that's around the period when Malawi as a country also started reviewing policies and started taking steps towards realizing the importance of climate change and environmental management in general, and the whole issue of looking back on our policies and making sure that they are in line with what is happening on the ground. So all these policies picked up policies from 1996 to date have an element of environmental management and acknowledgement of a climate change issue. But then it's important to emphasize that the concept of climate smart agriculture is relatively new. It's one concept that is slowly taking roots, and it does emphasize on integration of various principles. Now that takes us back to looking at the policies to see if the policies are integrating and talking to each other, and that's where the gap is. The challenge in our policy environment is that the policies are sectoral specific. There are many policies, yes, generated towards poverty reduction, catalyzing economic growth, food security, but then they're in silos and are not speaking to each other. So you also find that when messages from different angles of life, different sectors are being passed on to farmers, you get the same conflict, because every sector will look back on what their sectoral policy is talking about. So the one positive out of the climate smart agriculture project under EPIC was that it highlighted the missing link, the integration, the need for climate smart agriculture to be reflected across all sectors and to be key because of its importance in creating a good environment for productivity, for reduction of impacts to climate change. But then the question also that was raised and gap that was seen was investments into enabling actions that support climate smart agriculture. That is a missing piece in the whole puzzle. So from 2015 going forward, where we are revising our agricultural sector-wide approach, ASWAP, the issue of the role of climate smart agriculture is taking center stage and is being reflected. Again, the other missing link was a policy on climate change. Again, you find that because of the research findings, the project implementation findings, there is now a reflection of the place of climate change in the policies that are now coming up. Even the agricultural policy that's nearing completion is featuring climate change and the place of climate smart agriculture, and how all sectors would contribute to improving the situation. So going forward, the policy platform is cognizant of these issues and is taking them head on, and that is also feeding into the investment, the budgeting, and the future planning with that driver of where we are and what we need to do in order to consolidate the gains from the past couple of years. So now that would take you to what challenges there are in investment and what opportunities there are in investment. The national climate change policy is still being formulated, but alongside a national climate change investment plan, which has been completed. And in the investment plan, a climate change fund, has been created. And this fund is drawing from all stakeholders, starting with the development partner contribution, the public purse contribution, private sector, and even non-state actors, trusts, and NGOs. They are all coming to the understanding that we need to have a pool which we can tap from in terms of investment. The climate change fund is what came out of the National Climate Change Investment Plan. But the agricultural sector-wide approach is exactly the same. It's just like the climate change fund, drawing from all possible sources of funding and creating a purse, a basket that then the interventions, agricultural interventions, can draw from. And that's a window where climate smart agriculture best fits, because most investments that are planned under agricultural sector-wide approach related to agricultural production increase. And production increase is one of the definitions of climate smart agriculture. Any practice, any system, any approach that will lead to increase. So then the revision of agricultural sector-wide approach is also focusing and taking on board the climate smart agricultural approach, even in the funding and investment. So recently, climate smart agriculture funding, even through the climate change funding, climate change fund under the climate change investment plan, is being flagged and being elevated as the one sure way where all key players can come together and contribute positively to enhancing the gains and improving the practices under climate smart. However, the key challenge there still remains that of coordination, particularly between the different players, to make sure that at least the synergies are realized and are enhanced. But there's a clear appreciation that the trade-offs are not just in the short term when you have dedicated funding, but you also go into the long-term benefits. So one major lesson, therefore, from the Malawi case study is that of the policy and the investment, the planning of the climate smart agriculture approaches. So in summary, as I finish, just to highlight these major lessons from the case of Malawi, is that there has been co-delivery of services particularly where you have NGOs, non-state actors in the game, you have a better way of getting the message across to farmers and having farmers accept and appreciate and also adopt. And secondly, one of the challenges has been to quantify how much information has been passed on and is being used, particularly on land use. The gap in terms of studies that and information that is required for better planning was obviously coming up, and that's one thing. Even information that needs to feed into proper policy formulation as regards to specific practices and provenness of the practices on the ground. That's one area that's also come out of the Malawi case study. But Makai highlighted the third issue is the place of the agricultural sector-wide approach, the ASWAP. It has clearly shown that it builds on a strong program that has been running for some time, and it creates a high potential. It creates huge potential for quick deployment of climate-smart agriculture because it's countrywide, it's very well publicized, and it provides that opportunity. Inside that, you have the Farm Input Subsidy Program, which almost everyone, even children, to some extent know about it. And we, for cases, the case of agroforestry approaches which have been integrated with Farm Input Subsidy Program, the gains are over 100%. They are very obvious. So these already existing vehicles provide that opportunity, that window for furtherance of climate-smart agriculture approaches. But also the other thing that has been clearly coming up is the issue of capacity building, particularly in simulation modeling and looking at scenarios that can be used to predict the future in a more reliable manner. Some of the future projections have not been possible because of that lack. So this again is where research institutions and universities in particular come in, where they can contribute to that side of creating, providing that information that then policy can ride on to consolidate the gains. But it's obviously clear that the essential area of climate change policy development, there's been positive gains, and the programs that are coming up, issues of coordination and networking, advocacy, these areas still require additional attention. Greenhouse gas inventories, we still have problems there. We still have a gap that needs to be filled so that we can quantify and even look at the climate smartness of the approaches being used on the ground. So issues of investment in human, financial, and technical issues on these aspects that would then feed into policy development are obvious. So with that, then I come to the end of my short presentation on the case of climate smart agriculture in Malawi. But I would like, as I finish, to acknowledge materials in terms of pictures and even technical reports from a number of organizations, Rainwater Harvesting Association, NASFAM, the Land Resources Department, and the Sector Working Group on Agriculture, Land, and Water, Fund Plan, and also the World Bank and the GASA for their facilitation. I thank you all for your attention.
Thank you so much, Wilfred, for a great presentation. There are several questions that have come in during your presentation, and I'm going to start with one that maybe it's a good place to start, because you talked a little bit about the challenges at the end, and just if you can talk a little bit more, what do you see as the key barriers to the adoption of the CSA practices, both at the farmer level as well as challenges in creating an enabling environment at the policy level? You talked a little bit about the need for capacity building and for further training. Are there any other trade-offs at both of these levels that should be considered?
I'll talk about first on the farmer level. There's been the change I talked about of extension services, and the effort has been to take on board technologies, and one case has been to use mobile phones and reach out to farmers as quickly as possible, because the extension service workers are few on the ground, and the problem has been that they were not able to reach all farmers. But another one has also been at the approach that NASFAM used, where they would bring people to one place and do a research to look at the specific needs of a particular area. Again, even the Land Resources Department and other departments under the Ministry of Agriculture have come to realize that whereas previously it was one package, you take the same to everyone, they need to appreciate the differences in agroecological zones and package the message and package the information to suit specific areas. That has also been one thing that has come out of this. On the policy front, already a lot of input has taken place. The coming together of the Ministry of Agriculture, Irrigation and Development and the Ministry of Natural Resources to bring all their efforts, because one ministry is focusing on agriculture, the other one on climate change. That talking to each other to come up with a policy that speaks to both sectors has also been one major positive out of this. In the past, that was there, but it's been taken to a different level now, in that, like I said, the National Climate Change Policy has all key players from agriculture and from natural resources, even from other sectors, because the appreciation of climate change impacts has gone to everyone. So also the understanding that we need to double our efforts in working together and coming up with a policy that speaks across, that has been appreciated. So that's one other in the policy end, one other positive that's come out. Thank you.
Great, thanks. So just another question, which could be a follow-up to this one. When it comes to, you talked about the positive impact of CSA practices that farmers are noticing. And Hans Muzora from AgriDev Solutions would like to know, how is this awareness carried out? So how are farmers made aware that these practices are going to have a positive impact? Are the extension messages transmitted to beneficiaries, that means smallholder farmers, through government extension systems or through private extension networks? Transmission
to farmers uses whatever extension system is available. Primarily, the government system is charged with that role, and they do reach out and provide feedback to farmers on the ground, even taking farmers from one part of the country to another part of the country where there's been positive gains, so that the farmers learn by seeing and appreciating, or even interacting at a farmer-to-farmer level. That government has been doing, and you see that. But the NGOs and other players, they complement these efforts. They use the same approaches and interact with farmers from different places and take them from one place to another. So you have the doubling of efforts by both players. And you also have the platform, the technical working group. It provides a platform where government actors, NGO actors, interest parties, they come together at a much higher level, at sub-policy level, and share what's happening on the ground so that it then feeds into policies. So there is all that synergy and working together happening on the ground. But still the issue is to, even with the extension officers available on government side and NGO sides, we still need more because there are many more farmers that are yet to be reached again and again and again, so that they come to a point of eventually appreciating and understanding the messages that are being passed on.
Thank you, Wilfred. So the next question is this is one of the first few questions from Stephen Porter from University of Edinburgh. And Stephen is asking, what is an appropriate definition of poor or degraded soils in the Malawi context?
Poor degraded soils. A poor or degraded soil, I'll look at them as one or the other. Essentially is where you don't get the productivity out of as expected. So that could range from not having sufficient nutrients, or not having adequate water holding capacity for the type of crop as to be grown in it. And it goes all the way to the bigger problem of loss of topsoil, loss of the rich soil suitable for crops. So we're looking at that whole range, broadly speaking, when looking at poor degraded soils. Thank you.
Great. So there's another question from Stephen as well, and it relates to a slide that you showed early on during the presentation about annual precipitation. And Stephen is asking, Stephen's question goes like this: annual precipitation could be natural variability. What other impacts, in addition to changes or instability of the onset of rains, have been observed?
Okay, thank you. In terms of, Malawi, our major source of, like our economy is really agriculture based. 20% plus agriculture. So when you have problems with precipitation, the first area that gets impacted or affected is agriculture. And then if you also look at the workforce in Malawi, you have 80+% people employed or in an employment that's related to agriculture. So the number one area that will come up when you have any slight change or problem to do with precipitation, given also that our agriculture is mainly based on rain-fed agriculture, onset of rainfall will have that big impact on agriculture. So everything else really pales in significance. Not that it's not important, but the focus then goes to agriculture. But all the other sectors, they have the knock-on effects, starting from the effects that agriculture experiences. I would leave it at that thing.
Thank you. So there's a similar question from Dominic Nairongo from World Food Programme. Dominic is asking, what has been temperature changes over time versus annual precipitation, if you have that information?
I do not have the information handy, but there has been slight increase in temperature in some parts of Malawi, slightly higher than others, particularly the southern part of Malawi, the lower Shire end. The increases in temperature there are substantially higher compared to the northern part, and that also has affected the agricultural productivity, that it's going down in some parts of Malawi and going up in other parts of Malawi because of the fact that the increase in temperature will also have the effects on the soil health and soil soil situation and suitability for agriculture. So briefly, I'd say there's been an observed increase in temperatures across the country.
Great. So the next question is a question that has come up a lot during our GAXA webinar series, and it's from Michelle Mitwe from Germany, EcoConsult. Michelle is asking, how do you define a CSA technique to be smart?
The general consensus is for something to be smart, then the positives out of it must outweigh the negatives, and the efforts being put into realizing of the positives should not be more than the status quo. So any approach that would one, not call for so much input in terms of energy or even financial input, but yields greater results than before, then that would be said to be smart. Philosophically, one would say that where you get more pleasure and less pain is where you would say I'm being smart. So looking at the practices that I presented that Malawi is putting in place, that's the same thinking, that where you have gains and you're not having to put in so much over time, not just an instant, over time, that is considered as being smart. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question is from Hans Zora from AgriDev Solutions, and it's about the various CSA practices that you mentioned. So Hans is asking, which CSA practice contributed most to average income in Malawi?
Okay, I'll let my colleague here, Wycliffe, to answer the one about that one. Yeah.
Okay.
Thanks, Wilfred. As first, Wilfred has presented, there are several practices that have been promoted in Malawi, and he gave a case of, say, conservation agriculture contributing to the increase in the yields, which can transform into money in the pocket of the farmer. But currently, what is working most is the component of diversification. Because when they grow, the farmers grow different types of crops. They spread the risk, and at the end of the day, we find that still one particular crop has done well in that year. So diversification ranks very, very high. But in most cases, the farmers will diversify at the same time do, say, conservation agriculture.
Great, thank you. So we are almost at the end, but there are a few more questions that I would like to read before we close. So the next one is, I'm paraphrasing one of the questions that was submitted earlier, is do you see any trade-offs between food security and climate-smart agriculture implementation?
Food security. So the question is on trade-offs between food security and climate-smart agriculture?
Right.
Okay. At a small level, or looking at our country is divided into agricultural divisions. And then you have extension planning areas. When you look at specific extension planning areas, you see the trade-offs. Again, this very much depends on the agroecological zones like I said, where originally or previously the practices were just across the country and not looking at suitability of a practice for an area, to a point where, having learned, you see that this one works best in this area under these conditions, then you start seeing the trade-offs. This is what now I was saying needs to be taken across the country and spread across the country. But again, where there is a gap is on the metrics of quantifying the smartness and relating that directly to, if you do A, B, C, D, it transforms to this much in terms of gains. That's where also the researchers, we need to come in and confirm that, solidify that, so that the message goes back clearly and will be appreciated and taken up. Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Wilfred. So the next question is from Beatrice Makwenda from the National Association of Smallholder Farmers in Malawi. And Beatrice is asking, so the question is, as we consider the different agricultural priorities in Malawi versus the investments in CSA interventions, what are the transaction costs that we should consider, and who should bear the cost for these for the transition period for the farmers?
The other thing that I think we would like to will bear some cost in trying to facilitate the adoption. For example, there are some tools that are supposed to be used to facilitate adoption, like maybe in conservation agriculture, we're talking about the jab planters. We have to buy the jab planters to be used to plant under the scenario of conservation agriculture. The other thing is that for diversification, we are going for the varieties that are suited to the rainfall pattern this time around, and for those to be available, there shall be breeding cost, and also for access to the farmers. For it to be available, it needs to be made close to the farmer, that needs to be transported or multiplied. And also at the farmer level, the cost of buying itself, the farmers to buy, because something that is new to their environment and they want to multiply it.
If I can also just come in on that one, the issue of subsidy would also come in at some levels. There has to be the role of government coming in to provide that cost, or to pay the cost for particularly farmers that are on the economic scale, on the lower end. And this is where the Farm Input Subsidy Program, being a good vehicle for climate smart agriculture, comes in, because you already have investments and efforts towards the Farm Input Subsidy Program. So CSA practices will just ride on the already available investment from government side. And like I said, this is a program that's countrywide. Then you also help to spread the climate smart agricultural practices countrywide, because you already have an existing vehicle for it. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have the last two questions, because it's almost 10 here, and so we're just going to go over these last two questions, and then we'll end the webinar. So thank you so much for answering all of these questions to all of you. So the next question is from Willie Kauru, and Willie is asking, what are the key lessons from NAPAs in Malawi, and how are they informing CSA interventions?
The NAPA, the first one that we had in Malawi was 2008, which did very good analysis of the situation on the ground and a proper ranking and prioritizing of all the key issues. And in that ranking, all agricultural issues were on the high end of the rank, requiring that there has to be an effort, there has to be a lot of work on the agricultural front. However, there was no deliberate investment plan, and there was no deliberate implementation plan attached to the NAPA. As much as a lot of good work was done, which is very much appreciated, it was left now as just left on the table for anyone who is interested in any area to pick up and run along with it. So the revision of the NAPA, that was completed last year, 2015, has taken this on board and also linked it to the National Climate Change Investment Plan that we have to have some plan in as far as funding of the key areas, the key priority issues is concerned. So I would say that's the major lesson coming out of the NAPA implementation. Thank you.
Great. So the last question is from Leonard Wangai, and Leonard is from Oxfam. Leonard is asking, has there been any attempt to make sure the vulnerable farmers have access to reliable weather or climate products to support climate-sensitive decision-making?
Yes, there has been, there was a realization that our weather information and weather-related issues were not where we would want them to be. So there has been investments and efforts from the responsible department and the Ministry of Natural Resources in enhancing and improving the climate change and meteorological services department. So they've invested in weather stations, mobile and fixed, and also training to make sure that there is, first of all, the information, there is the data, and also that it's taken to the ground. They're working with existing stakeholders, extension service providers, to take the information back to the people in a form that will be understood and appreciated, packaged together with climate smart agriculture approaches. So there has been some effort in that area. Thank you.
I think maybe in addition to that, like the med stations, previously they were far apart. Now the placement is becoming closer because the pattern of rainfall has changed. But another deliberate programs like the Farm Input Subsidy Program, which is targeting improved varieties that are suited to the current environment. And the other one is like in Malawi here, the under irrigation, the trade-off pump. The government deliberately issue free trade-off pumps to the smallholder farmers, and maybe also reduce remove taxes on pumps that are used for irrigation purposes.
Great. Thank you so much to Wilfred, John, and Wycliffe for being here with us today and for sharing these lessons.
Thank you.
I really appreciate you taking the time and for answering all the questions. So we have come to the end of the webinar. And before I sign off, I would just like to ask everyone to complete the survey that is appearing on the right-hand side of the screen, just to let us know what you thought about the webinar. And I hope I'll see you again tomorrow for our next webinar and the last one actually in this series, featuring lessons from Tanzania. So on behalf of the GAXA team, thank you all for joining, and thank you to our presenters and